This video is part of an ongoing series of book reviews from the perspective of the magical philosophy of Thelema. In this video, we're looking at Thoughts in Solitude by Thomas Merton, a short book of meditations on the practice of contemplative solitude, written by Thomas Merton, an ordained Roman Catholic monk who lived and wrote as part of the Abbey of Our Lady of Gethsemane, a Christian intentional community in Kentucky in the middle of the last century. The communal life of the abbey was structured according to the traditional rule of Saint Benedict, which provides for a regulated daily cycle of both collective ritual worship and private prayer, with the latter normatively conducted in silence. For certain periods of time, and while under the spiritual direction of a confessor, monks withdraw even further into the privacy of prayer, and it is in this context that Merton's meditations were written. As an atheist, I find Merton's openness to the experience of the absence of God as the basis for contemplative faith rather refreshing, given the prevalence of evangelical certitude in American society and its inevitable neo-pagan imitators. Merton writes, "For inner silence depends on a continual seeking, a continual crying in the night, a repeated bending over the abyss. A silence from which he does not seem to be absent dangerously threatens his continued presence. He is found when he is sought, and when he is no longer sought, he escapes us." Unquote. Merton deploys the familiar medieval mystical trope of the soul as a mirror in which God is reflected. But in his version, the mirror is dark and silent in its purity. Quote, "Empty of every image except the image of the invisible Father. We glorify the Father in hope through the darkness of his image, which excludes every other likeness from our soul, making us live by a pure relationship and dependence on the Father." Unquote. Interestingly, this apophatic method leads Merton to the simple positive solution to the riddle of faith that, as he puts it, quote, "As soon as you are really alone, you are with God." Unquote. As a theological thesis, I think this hits the mark. I just interpret it more literally than Merton, as an existential anthropological statement, not the positing of faith in a supernatural truth behind my solitude, such that its existence is metaphysically grounded and justified. Rather, that I exist and self-consciously meditate my existence is already the necessary and sufficient ground for the authenticity and significance of my self-existence. The facticity of my existence is profound enough to spend a lifetime contemplating, without having to bring fictional characters like God and Jesus into the equation as incomplete and therefore ultimately false solutions to the very real question posed by my being, namely the meaning of my life, a puzzle to which I and I alone must solve the riddle. Regardless, the mythological form of traditional religious rhetoric codes important existential information in a symbolic mode, and therefore shouldn't be simply disregarded. Instead, this material calls out to be reinterpreted in a manner liberated from the imprisoning rhetoric of fundamentalist literalism. However, although secular liberalism releases society from the tyranny of Christian hegemony, it simultaneously abandons it to the vulgarity of commodity reification. When Merton wrote this text in the 1950s, television was already becoming a social nuisance. Now, most people carry a portable entertainment machine in the form of their phone about with them all day, every day. In this context, just being able to quietly sit still or walk about and remember myself in terms of my own mystery, free from emotional distraction, is already against the grain of the consumer mass media culture that saturates our everyday experience. In this harried, hyperactive context, Thomas Merton's thinking resonates when he writes how, quote, "Society depends for its existence on the inviolable personal solitude of its members. Society, to merit its name, must be made up not of numbers or mechanical units, but of persons. To be a person implies a certain interior solitude, a sense of personal integrity, a sense of one's own reality, and of one's ability to give himself to society or to refuse that gift, unquote. I find that Merton's concept of solitude in the context of a monastic vocation powerfully relates to the Thelemic ideal of the hermit, particularly in regards to the privacy inherent to the magical and mystical system of Aleister Crowley's teaching order, the AA, with its focus on personal practice. This system is normatively structured as a confidential one-on-one relationship between a magical practitioner and a spiritual director who reviews and assists in their progress through the system. The practitioner proceeds at their own pace and on their own initiative through a pre-established pedagogy of spiritual exercises. They keep a diary, which is reviewed by their director, who advises and assists their progress through the initiatory stages of the system. This procedure is in many ways similar to the kind of monastic spirituality practiced by Thomas Merton. In this sense, the AA can be thought of as a kind of hermitage, although its initiates are not cloistered. Hence, its 3 colleges are said to be invisible, meaning they are bracketed off from social distractions to facilitate an inner path of initiation guarded and sanctified within the magical circle of magical solitude. The non-enclosed character of the AA is noteworthy in contrast to traditional Christian monasticism, as it follows the precept of the Rosicrucian Manifesto that the mystical adept should follow the customs of the country they reside in and not dwell apart from the commons in a special attire or form of life. The spiritual solitude of the Thelemic hermit is therefore primarily established not by outward forms, but by the inward intention of the magical will. Regardless, the intended effect is ultimately much the same as that described by Thomas Merton. The magic of the AA is therefore worked in spiritual solitude, even amidst the bustle and hurry of day-to-day life. In conclusion, although Thelema is predominantly a neo-pagan spirituality, the traditions of Christian mysticism provide abundant resources for its eclectic pedagogy of practices. Thomas Merton was a very modern person, and his writings on the Christian, more specifically Roman Catholic, monastic contemplative tradition, emphasize how it can be understood and practiced by fully modern persons, including those who no longer practice contemplation in the context of Christian faith or even of theistic belief at all. Thoughts in solitude therefore has relevance for mystics and meditators of all traditions.